Well, we're very fortunate today to have Dr. Brian Watts. He's the director for the Center for Conservation Biology come speak with us about the Virginia population. Back in the early 70s, when it was determined that the population of eagles had declined significantly every place in just about every place in the United States. Alaska didn't suffer much. Some of the northern tier states, Wisconsin, Minnesota, so forth, didn't suffer too much, but Virginia did. We were down to about 33 pair of breeding bald eagles in Virginia. And that population today is approaching 700, may exceed 700. And it's due in large part to the work of Dr. Mitchell Bird and Dr. Brian Watts. In fact, they were both recognized last year by the Department of Interior for the significant contribution that they had made to the reintroduction and repopulation of the bald eagles in the United States. I've had the honor and the pleasure to work with Dr. Bird and Dr. Watts for over 30 years on various projects. And you aren't going to find two people that know more about raptors and specifically the bald eagle, peregrine, osprey. So in 1991, the two of them, Dr. Bird and Dr. Watts, formed the Center for Conservation Biology at the College of William and Mary, and are now providing services not only to Virginia, but throughout the United States and into foreign countries as well. So we're very fortunate. Last week, Dr. Watts finished the first of 2 flights that they do in Virginia to determine the population of bald eagles here in Virginia. So he's pretty up to date with what he's seen. So Dr. Brian Watts. I'm going to get back here out of the way.
Somebody here for the you want me to do something? Look it up.
So you can set up and I'll work late for. Let's see, maybe we can.
Dr. Watts, do you mind if I keep recording?
Yeah, sure, whatever you want.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can do it. How's that? No, not quite. We're not on the screen. See?
That's the horse map on the screen.
That'll do it. Now, let's see if we get back here. Play here. Whoa. Well, it's a privilege for me to be with you here today. I appreciate you inviting me to come down and talk about eagles briefly. Let's see. Before I get started, let's go to the next one.
Just hit enter.
Just hit. There's an arrow key there. Yeah. As Reese mentioned, the Center for Conservation Biology works with birds. That's all we do is birds. We do about 40 projects a year. Since the center was started in '91, maybe we've done 500 projects. Most of those have been focused on the Mid-Atlantic region. We don't just work with eagles, we work with all different species, shorebirds, colonial water birds, passerines, etc. But we do a lot of raptor work. We're just finishing up some work in the Gulf right now. We've been flying down there over the winter for osprey and eagles related to the Gulf spill. And we'll be back down there doing some productivity work this spring in Louisiana and Mississippi. But we really work on bird conservation, and that's all we do. Yeah, there are 4 different focal areas that the center does that you can see here. We work with migration, we work with human stress, we work with species of conservation concern, and we help the conservation community design conservation solutions. But what I'll be talking about today really is eagles, and I'll end up talking about some of the human-related interactions that we have there. Yeah, let's go. So what I'm going to cover today is Reese asked me to talk about the population, a little bit about the history of the population, where we're going, where we have been, that sort of thing. I'm going to start with a little bit of some introductory ecology, some of what you've just been discussing, but maybe I'll say something that we haven't discussed. Yeah, let's move. So as you know, I'm sure from the past, eagles belong to a genus of sea eagles that have a wide distribution. Depending on the time and the taxonomic breakdown, there have been anywhere from about 9 to 11 of these species. They're very similar in their ecology and in terms of their plumage. They have a similar plumage maturation. Their ecologies are quite similar depending on large water bodies. And in addition to that, their conservation history has been quite similar. Almost all of these species suffer declines like our bald eagle, and most of them are recovering now. And there have been great efforts around the world to recover these different species. Yeah. Our American bald eagle is the only representative of this group in the New World. All these other species are restricted to the Old World, and it turns out that there is no member of this group in the Southern Hemisphere in the New World. And so our bald eagle is restricted. It's the only member of this group that's in the New World, and it's restricted to North America. And if we look at its distribution, you can see it's distributed primarily around large water bodies, and that's consistent with its ecology and consistent with the ecology of this entire group. Well, if we look along the Atlantic coast, in particular, one of the dominant large water bodies is the Chesapeake Bay that you can see here. And so it has been important for this particular species for a very long period of time. And if we talk about the Chesapeake Bay, it is actually a huge drainage basin. It touches on 6 different states. It's about 75,000 square kilometers in terms of the watershed. But when we think about bald eagles, it's really this part of the bay that's most significant, and that's the part that's east of the fall line. As you know, the fall line runs about along Interstate 95. That's the place where the coastal plain meets the Piedmont, and that is the place of tidal influence. So the tides from the ocean only reach up to the fall line, and that's a very rich part of the bay, and that's why it's been such a focal area for eagles. Here's a picture that you may not have seen before. This is a composite satellite image of primary productivity along the mid-Atlantic coast. And what I want to point out to you is that this is a reflectance of chlorophyll A, an indication of primary productivity, is how rich these bays are. The Chesapeake Bay, in terms of primary productivity, is about 30 times greater than the open ocean. And so it's an incredibly rich area. That's due to really 2 things. One, the depth of the bay, which is very shallow, and secondly, the nutrient inflow from the surrounding landscape. That enriches the bay, and so it's an incredibly productive. The Chesapeake Bay is one of the most productive aquatic ecosystems anywhere in the world, and that's why it's so important for fish-eating birds. Yeah. And I think we all know that. We all reap a lot of the productivity from the bay. The bay is well known for its seafood resources. Increasingly, as we look down the road from a conservation perspective, we need to be more and more aware that we're not the only users of these aquatic resources, right? We have other consumers of these, some of which are eagles, but we have many other species that depend on these also. And we need to make sort of room for them within this food chain that we're part of.